Welcome to this episode of the John Henry Westen Show. May God bless you. We are absolutely thrilled to bring to you today Dr. Janet Smith. Many of you will remember her as the famous Dr. Janet Smith from Contraception, Why Not? That incredible tape, which in my own life, it made a difference, and for countless Catholics around the world, gave them not only the hope and the reason why to be faithful to the Church's teaching, but also enabled them to speak intelligibly to others on the subject. Stay tuned for this interview with Janet Smith, where we will be discussing the sexual abuse crisis in the Church, Pope Francis, and all the rest. Stay tuned. Welcome, Dr. Smith, to the John Henry Westen Show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, let's start as we always do with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dr. Janet Smith, if you may, I'll just call you Janet. It has been, it's a great honor for me to speak to you, given your history in the Church. And it's really an exciting one for me because it was very inspirational for me too. You were called, as we've been called at LifeSite often, to handle the hard issues in the Church, as it were, starting off there with contraception.
It seems so. But I have an appetite for these things. Sometimes people think I must be phenomenally courageous or something like that. And honestly, it's just that I have a phenomenal taste for controversy. And I really don't like to do things that aren't controversial. So I don't know why God made me that way, but I'm glad he did.
Excellent. You've been, for those of you who might not know, Dr. Smith has been a professor at the seminary in Detroit. How long has that been going on?
I think it's been 19 years. I just retired July 1st.
And since your retirement or before that, when have you taken on this new interest, this new role in really getting deep into the learning about studying the sexual abuse crisis in the Church?
Well, I actually had been aware of the sexual abuse situation for a very long time. In the 70s and 80s, I really was an avid reader of The Wanderer and even of the National Catholic Reporter, who both reported the situation in great and disgusting detail. I had to stop reading it because it was so salacious. And then in the early 2000s, all the books that came out, Pottles and Michael Rose, and a number of books, and Jason Berry, I read these books. And I thought, well, surely if I know this, the bishops do. And surely if I'm concerned, the bishops are. And I was so confident there were little committees of bishops all over the United States trying to figure out what to do about this situation. And then the crisis in 2005, Dallas Charter, people were saying the bishops just don't get it. They still don't get it. And I said, oh, that's ridiculous. These are mature and good men. Surely they'll get it. And then came out the McCarrick case. And the veil fell from my eyes. The scales fell from my eyes. I just had a sense that this church is corrupt. And over a series of months, I guess like a lot of people, I was just increasingly devastated, increasingly disappointed in our bishops, and more realizing that they're the problem. They're not the solution. And I had taken a sabbatical for the fall to work on some projects. But then I found myself very rapidly becoming very involved in just talking to people, talking to victims, talking to whistleblowers, talking to people who were trying to figure out what to do. And I was getting nothing done on my scholarly projects. And I really felt that, I talked to my spiritual director, and we both agreed that this is what God had called me to do. So I turned that into a leave of absence. And so I've spent the last year really quite thoroughly involved with this, hours and hours every day, reading everything I can, talking to people. And I was really surprised that I was tired of teaching and not doing such a good job because my interests were now elsewhere. So I asked the seminary, I plan to retire next year. But I asked them if I could bump it up a year, and they were willing to let me do that. So now I'm basically, I still do a lot of my travel and speaking. That I intend to continue that. I have other projects I want to finish off, books I've got in the process. But this really is my priority.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say, after having looked at this for so long right now, what's your take on the situation right now?
The bishops are the problem, right? And there's very little effective things that the laity can do directly. The bishops are not doing anything, or so little that it hardly makes a difference, whatever it is. Any sentence that begins with the bishops ought to do X, Y, and Z is almost an empty sentence. I don't know what they will do or can do, even can do. If we were to get rid of all the bad bishops, and there are lots, we have no confidence that they wouldn't be replaced by men equally as bad. And so that's not a solution. The solution, what we do, what I've learned is that the bishops are the problem. We have to just pray and pray and pray and try to listen to the Holy Spirit and ask what the Holy Spirit wants of us. I don't think there's one single swoop any group or anybody can do. I think with the media, I think what you're doing is of enormous importance, which is really trying to educate the Catholic public about this. Again, I was prepared in a sense to believe it because I knew. I'd read the books, I'd read the articles. I still didn't believe it was at the extent it was. I mean, I believe Richard Sipe, who said 30% of the bishops are, possibly sexually active as homosexuals. Now I don't want the limit. The sky is the limit on that number right now. And I don't want to smear good bishops. I don't want to smear men who are doing the best that they can and trying to do what they can. But I'm afraid I think there's precious few of them. And I'm not even certain that even those who are trying to do the best that they can are doing very well.
Wow. With that kind of an assessment and seeing this and being steeped in it regularly and all the horror that brings, you still find yourself a Catholic. You still believe in the faith and you still love the church. What is that? Where does that come from?
I'm a lifelong Catholic. I'm a cradle Catholic. I had a reversion left the church for a short period of time, had a reversion in my early 20s, the most unlikely of times, the early 70s. And luckily I had a phenomenal group of friends who had also discovered our faith. And we became really learned in our faith. We kind of had almost a self-designed novitiate where we read and talked and prayed. And I'm going nowhere. This is Jesus's church. I don't think I can find anything like it that the church offers. It offers the sacraments. It's Jesus's church. Jesus is not surprised that this happened. He knows the perfidy of the human soul. And in a sense, it's a test for all of us. Do we believe because we like our priest or like our bishop, or the liturgies are at a convenient time, or this is just something that's become familiar to us and we like spending an hour on Sunday morning, going with a group of people to worship? Or do we really, really believe that this is Jesus's church? And there's nowhere else to go in my mind. I love this church. And I will go nowhere else. I've never even been tempted to do that. I understand other people who are. I don't disdain them. I don't think they're stupid. But I think they really need to consider what they would lose. But it doesn't matter how bad the priest is. It doesn't matter how bad a bishop is. It doesn't even matter how bad the Pope is. The sacraments are valid. That's what I need. I need that to live, and I need that to deal with this crisis. Going elsewhere would just sever me from the thing that gives meaning to my life, that makes it possible for me to do any of the good things that I do in this world.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And this is very interesting because I think there's so many people who I've now even attacked you who have spent your life defending even the hardest teachings of the church. And funny enough, there's a lot of people who wouldn't defend that, who were actually fighting the church at the time. But they've come out now to attack you because you've dared to open your mouth on some of the crisis that's going on. One of the questions that I had for you with regard to this kind of hardship is, what's your take now with regard to Pope Francis? You've studied, the situation revolving around him as well, and what's your take there?
Well, at a certain point, and to a certain extent, I'm not totally prepared to go there yet. It's a level of disappointment and maybe even betrayal that I'm not certain I don't know how to process yet. I've been disappointed from the start. I was very disappointed in his initial statements that it was unfortunate there were so many people who were obsessed with pro-life issues, were obsessed with abortion and contraception. I was terribly offended by that at the beginning. I loved his homilies. I loved some of the images that he used. I loved his calling people really to a very radical commitment. I mean, to some extent, I think I have at points in my life become comfortable, both materially in every way, and don't think I need to challenge myself a lot more. And I felt that Pope Francis had challenged me. I loved some of his prose in some of his documents. I thought it was just extraordinarily eloquent and beautiful. But he has said so many things that are really, really troublesome and very ambiguous, and he won't respond to challenges for clarity. He says one thing in the morning and another thing in the afternoon. And more is coming out. I mean, I certainly don't think he's done the job that anybody expected him to do to help clean up the Curia. In fact, I think he's added to the problem. The things that I read about his possible neglect of dealing with sexual abuse cases in Argentina before he came, I don't, it doesn't look good. As I said, that's a level of disappointment I'm not ready to, I'm not able yet to fully accept. And so I'm just letting other people fight that battle. Again, thank you for what you do. And thank you to many of my scholarly colleagues who have, these are people, many of my colleagues at the seminary, many of my colleagues across the United States and the world who have spent their whole life taking big bullets for the faith, being ridiculed as being blindly obedient to the magisterium, as being unable to think for themselves, and have really taken a beating, professionally, personally, in defending the Pope and defending the Church. And they have bent over backwards trying to see how what Pope Francis has said can be understood as being in continuity with the tradition. And one by one, they seem to be saying, I can't do that anymore. The evidence is overwhelming that there are serious, serious problems here. His latest, the latest attack on the John Paul II Institute in Rome is totally predictable and just devastating. It's one of those bulwarks of fidelity in the church today, thing that has done a massive amount of good in educating people who are now placed all over the world, very able to defend and advance the church's teaching on marriage and sexuality and other issues. And to see that is being really quite violently destroyed, again, is extremely distressing. So my gratitude for those who are willing to take on that battle. I'm taking on another battle, but I'm sort of behind them as a cheerleader saying, you go, girl, you go, guy. They're doing what they need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things as a professor at a Catholic college, at a seminary even, your appreciation for that situation in Rome, that which you were referring to about the John Paul II Institute, it's really quite something. All the professors suspended, and then two of the ones most closely related to John Paul's own thought, to St. John Paul II's own thought, particularly Professor Molina, who has now come out with a public interview. Monsignor Molina being so intimately involved with John Paul II in terms of his thought and study and giving that great teaching to successive generations of Catholic young people who've been formed in that teaching, now summarily dismissed and fired. And he just, in a recent interview he gave to Il Foglio, explained how basically even in previous ages, if you will, under previous pontificates, when there were totally heretical kind of theologians or professors, even they were given the right to contest their being taken up for things before being dismissed. But these guys who are trying to interpret Francis, as you said, in line with previous magisterial thought, are being just summarily dismissed. No opportunity for appeal, no nothing.
It really is scandalous, and I wish they. A lot of us are writing letters. A lot of us are writing letters to those who are now in charge and trying to express our concern. I hate to say, I don't think they care. I think they dismiss anybody who criticizes them or even raises criticisms as being cranks, and just dismisses us. But I'm concerned that this makes the church a bit of a laughingstock in the face of in the academic community as large. Academics are not accustomed to being treated this way. We're not just employees of a university. We're a community of scholars who have invested an enormous amount in personally, in career. Many of the people there have families. They're not living at the top dollar of anything. Made enormous sacrifices to defend the church and the truth. And you would think that in an institution like that, they'd be consulting the faculty about what is it that you, in teaching here for all these years, do you find any lack in the kind of education? They would survey the students who have been educated there and who are out in the field now and ask them, were you not trained fully in the way that you should have been? Are there things that you wish you would have been taught that you weren't? If you're going to reform an institution, you talk to the people inside the institution to find out what it is that might be lacking in that institution. But that clearly didn't happen. They're just being treated as disposable parts. You can just fire them all and hire new people. And you say, that's not the way academic institutions work. I don't know what the accrediting requirements are in Italy, but surely in the United States, this would be a lethal blow to an institution, that you could just, dismiss all these professors without any justification for these dismissals, men and women who performed extremely well in the institution. So it's extremely, again, just discouraging. I'm praying and hoping that there will be some donors who step forward and say, maybe these are people who found reason not to support their local diocese anymore, and say, I know a really good use for my money. A really good use for my money now would be set up an organization that would reinstitute, call it the St. John Paul II Institute for Marriage and Family, and set up in Rome and hire the same people and just keep going. If that could happen, I would, I can't levitate, but I hope God would give me that power. I would try to do somersaults anyway.
Wow. To get back to the issue of your expertise, it's a very difficult area of study, this whole, the sexual abuse crisis in the church, because there's so much lying, there's hiding, there's there's an obfuscation of what's really going on. We saw with the original John Jay report that it was 80% homosexual abuse, and yet now it seems, if you listen to some people in the church in very high positions, has nothing at all to do with homosexual abuse. It has to do with priests taking on too much authority and power, clericalism as they call it. What's your take on that? And a sort of related question: how do you discern in all of this? How do you know what to hold on to as the truth, and how do you make those determinations?
About the sex abuse crisis.
Yes, what you hear? Yeah.
Yeah, the patterns are very, very clear. I mean, there's the way that priests groom young men, children, or young men or adults. The way that they groom them is pretty much the same across the board. Across the board, the same things that happens when victims contact dioceses. They're given the most incredible runaround. The bishop doesn't want to meet with them. They are made to feel that they are causing trouble for the priest in the church. The bishop points out some incredibly imprecise and misleading statement about what really happened. And usually the perpetrator, I mean, there are some that because they've committed crimes are removed, but those who don't commit crimes are just who commit revolting sins and haven't been leading a life that's faithful in any way to Jesus. They aren't teaching his gospel. They aren't ministering to people in the way that they should minister to people. They are just living a comfortable life. And usually with sexual misconduct comes financial misappropriations and lax liturgies and certainly lax teaching. So you have all these souls out there that aren't being fed in the way in which they deserve to be fed by their church. I'm trying to read everything I haven't read and basically reread things I read years ago. Just read a book recently that talked about some victims in California that successfully at one time sued on the basis of fraud, saying that the church teaches one thing and practices another, and that those of us who are donating to this church are not getting what we are giving to. We're not getting the teaching that we're, in a sense, paying for. That's a crude way of saying it, but we're supporting a church and want that church to help us get to heaven, and it's not. So there's not a lot of people say, well, how do you believe things? And I say, well, it's really hard to start because you can't believe that men who offered themselves to the Lord and have been to the seminary and stand at the altar, you can't believe that they have done the things that they're purported to have done. And then you read about these over and over again. And as I said, the patterns are the same. And before long, you start to have a nose for it. We have one here in Detroit now that seems to be fairly manifestly a false accusation, as is the one with, it seems to me, Cardinal Pell. There's just something there that rings so wrong with the accusations that are being made and the person that we know. I know it's not unusual for predators to put on a very different face and to appear very differently from how they are. And I know there's men who appear to be faithful and appear to be supportive of the church who are just using that as a front in order to be able to engage in the predation that they engage in. I know that's true. But there's someone that you just hear it and you say, oh, if that's true, I can hardly trust myself anymore. If it's true about them, what's true about anything?
Yeah. And it does make it so difficult because, here you have good men being accused falsely and then evil men being believed when they're doing these evil things. I mean, it was incredible to realize and watch. You can go and watch the old videos where in 2002, who's responding for the bishops to the sexual abuse crisis? It's then Cardinal McCarrick himself.
Oh, it's devastating. I thought, with the sex abuse crisis meeting in Rome that one of the reporters set up and said, I was here 15 years ago. And it was McCarrick who was sitting there assuring me that the church was going to take care of it and it was a problem of the past. And, she said, how can you assure me that you're not another McCarrick? And I want to say there are a lot of McCarricks out there. There are a lot of McCarricks out there who are assuring this that it's all over, it's all done, it's in the past. And that's what we're living with. And when I started to see that, I had to change the whole course in a sense of my life and say, there's not anything I have to do that's more important than coming to grips with this and doing if it turns out that I am, and everybody knows, I started praying more. We're praying more. We're going to Mass more. We're staying up and getting there earlier, staying longer, saying our rosaries, doing our adoration, and just praying more. I mean, most of us have thought we were, somewhere between 80 and 100% all in with the church. And now we're beginning to realize we were closer to maybe 50 and that we've really had to start praying and sacrificing and considering more and more. What does God want me to do in this respect? I don't think we should put those things on ourselves. We have to just keep asking. I mean, I think the most important thing in life is people to learn how to hear God's voice, I've started thinking a whole lot less and praying a whole lot more and not trying to figure things out. I'm trying to just let God guide me in what I read and what how I respond and who I associate with and what I do. I'm trying to listen very closely to his voice. And if he wants me to mortify myself more, I hope I will respond. I don't want to lay it on myself because I think we do a lot of stupid things, even in that respect. And so I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Okay, it's only really fruitful if God wants you to do that. But that's what we all have to be doing. I know so many friends who are doing that. And honestly, I have some friends who, say, 5 months ago, kind of looked on the verge of a nervous breakdown. This was just so hard to process. And they really did the Catholic thing of becoming more sacramental and more prayerful. They actually look now to be more peaceful than I've ever seen them. It's an astonishing thing. It's beautiful. It shows what the church is.
Yeah. Yeah. Here we're being rocked to our very core. And perhaps that is about coming to that place of a greater purity in our own lives, a greater focus on Christ in our own lives. It's almost like Cardinal Ratzinger or Father Ratzinger at the time when he made those predictions, which are so famous about a smaller and purer church, was also talking about the individual soul becoming itself smaller and purer as well.
It has to happen. I mean, I have an unbelievably wonderful spiritual director. I was talking to him about how we're really getting an incredible glimpse of the epic cosmic struggle that's going on between good and evil. That you have St. Michael the Archangel and Lucifer are just battling it out big time, and we're getting a glimpse of that. And he said, Janet, he said, it's happening all the time. And it is true that every once in a while, God pulls back the veil and let us see what's happening. As I said, I think many of us, myself included, had become very comfortable. I'd actually thought the church was making enormous strides in reforming itself, that we had many, many more good universities, that we were turning out more faithful Catholics. There were many more families who were embracing the church's teaching. Still proportionately small, but more and more. And I thought, wow, we've turned a corner. We had the Catechism. We had John Paul II. We had Benedict, as far as doctrine is concerned. And I thought, oh my gosh, look what's happening here. And then I see the rot that's right at the heart of the church. And I said, I was getting comfortable. I was saying, I could probably go to the Gulf of Mexico and put my feet in there and just read what I want to read, and the church will they can get along without me. I'm quite sure the church can get along without me, but I really think that it made all of us think, again, what's more important than, again, all in 100% with Jesus? And what does he want of me? I'm sure he doesn't want me watching hours of TV or surfing the internet or sitting with my feet, except occasionally in the Gulf of New Mexico. But and I do think so many of the people I know that are the most devastated by this have dug deep. Families I know, I've lots of families around here who are just reassessing everything. I have one friend who is moving away from his home right now, taking his family to he scouted around for the place that he can find that he thinks he can do the best by. He was best by his family. He had made a decision to put his kids in public schools, hoping that his family could have an impact on the school, and was saying again how the schools have an impact on the family. He's making a very sacrificial move to go somewhere else so he can do what he needs to do for his family.
Yeah, truly heroic decisions. What you said there about, I'm sure it could get along without me. You know what? I really believe it's true. Our Lord chooses not to get along without you. And so he calls each and every single one of us to, as you said, be all in, to devote ourselves wholly and completely to his love and his service of his body, the church. And you're doing that, and you've encouraged many, many by your words right now to do that. So thank you for that. Right in the beginning of our Lord's ministry, he himself chose Judas. And I can't help but think that that was sort of now a kind of a grace. Yes, we all know it's a grace because it led to his crucifixion, which led, of course, to our salvation. But in a way, it gave us a very early example of the corruption of the shepherds, which in a way is comforting now, because we knew right back then that you don't throw out Jesus because of Judas, and therefore you don't throw out the church because of the corruption of many of its shepherds.
Well, that's exactly right. It is consoling. There was Judas and there was Peter, and there were all the apostles who left at the moment of the crucifixion, except for John, who stuck close to Mary. And there's a lesson there, isn't there? I've just written a column. I don't know when it's published, probably in the next 2 weeks or so, that is about basically good bishops and who are those who, they teach what the magisterium teaches. They live moral lives. They live lives of service. But that's not enough now. That's definitely not enough. And they need to go through however many there are, I'm afraid there might not be many. They need to go through those men who are basically good bishops, the ones that we sort of do cartwheels for. Say, oh, there's Bishop so-and-so and so-and-so and so. Say, they're not doing what needs to be done. I know it's hard, but they're not. And they need to have a new Pentecost. They really need to become absolutely on fire with love for the Lord and love for the church, and just not worry about where the chips fall. Not worry if they're approved by the world or by the bishops or their priests or their congregation. They need to spend a lot of time with the Lord, again, trying to hear his voice and find out what he wants. And I'm pretty sure he wants them to really clean up their own diocese first. I mean, my suggestion from the start has been, you say, if I were a bishop, if I were a bishop, I hope that what I'd do is I would talk to my priest and I would say, any of you who are living lives that are not worthy of the Lord, none of us are, but in some seriously wrong way, you're living a double life. Your males are having sex with males, or males are having sex with women, or you're embezzling, or you're just drinking your life away, and you don't intend to stop. Come to me, and I will put you a nice package together to exit from the priesthood. We're not going to get the high and dry. We're going to try to find you skills that will help you get jobs, but goodbye, right? And those of you who, after prayer and reflection, realize that you love the priesthood and you failed the priesthood and you don't want to be this way and you want to live a life worthy of the calling that you've been called to, come to me. And we will try to find out a program, and not just send you off to some spa somewhere where you'll get babied for months on end at very high expense. But we'll do some hard, tough stuff that's going to help you find virtue, to build virtue and live a life full of grace. And I've already been through my files, and I've seen the accusations that have been made against you. And if you're not here in my office with one or the other responses, I'm sending out private investigators, and I'm finding out whether these accusations are true or not. I hope all of you get cleared, but anybody who doesn't get cleared, you're leaving, right? Voluntarily or involuntarily, you're leaving. Now, the bishops don't want to do this. To my mind, maybe I'm just so totally arrogant, but it seems to me this is a pretty clear thing to do, right? You just work on your own diocese, and you clean out and say, well, I won't have enough priests to do this, and I won't have enough priests to do that. You say, just do your job. And then, I want to say, if it turns out that all we have left is the bishop who says a mass in the local football stadium every Sunday, okay, let's start there. My guess is that you'll have the most beautiful, strong vocations coming forward like an army within months, right? it'll take a while for us to educate those men, inform them, but I'm willing to wait. I don't want to leave my local parish. I don't want to worship in a stadium. But if that's what it comes to, doggone it, let's do it. Let's just start from scratch and build the whole thing all over again.
Yeah. How much of that, just so our viewers know, how much of what you just said is real hyperbole in that, how realistic do you think it could be that a particular diocese might have almost no priests left if a bishop really took serious his responsibility this way?
Well, again, most of these bishops have inherited that. I mean, they didn't create those situations. We have to be clear about that. Mm-hmm. Not that a lot of them aren't a part of it. I mean, I'm not taking people off the hook, but I think it's very different from diocese to diocese. All right. Richard Sipe and other studies show that at any given time, 50% of priests are not being faithful to their vows of chastity. And believe me, if they're not being faithful to their vows of chastity, they're not being faithful in other, even more important ways. All right. And that's horrible. But I also think it's remarkable in this day and age that 50% are being faithful. It shows it's possible. Shows it's possible. There's been almost no support from their church, from their culture, all right? And still they're digging down deep and staying close to the Lord and managing that, in this culture, a kind of heroic virtue of chastity. So I'm told that in some dioceses there might be as many, it sounds preposterous, but what can I say? That these are people on the inside who tell me this stuff, that some studies seem to support it, that up to 90%, all right, of priests are living immoral, very manifestly immoral lives. In other dioceses, it might be as low as 5%. So it's going to be different from diocese to diocese. And so it might be true in some dioceses and not others. But I've secondhand, I've heard people who have heard from bishops themselves who said, if I got rid of all the sexually active priests in my diocese, I'd lose half of my presbyterate. They've said it, right? So if it comes from a bishop's mouth, I'm supposing he's been through the files. He knows it's not just some speculative thing. I hope I'm entirely wrong. I hope that I am entirely wrong, but I'm afraid the evidence points in the most pessimistic direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that, despite that knowledge, despite that persecution or not persecution, an internal kind of suffering of the church where the body is being sort of eaten by a cancer that's just unbelievably devouring, the health of the church. What's your outlook? Do you still have hope? And what's your message for faithful Catholics as we close out this interview?
I don't know what's going to happen. As I've talked with my friends, and all of us have tried to figure out scenarios, and we can't even think of a scenario. We can't even think of a scenario that would say, okay, this is the direction, this is what should happen, this might happen. We can't think of one, as I said, because if the bishops, we got rid of the bad bishops, there'd probably be just as bad bishops put in. So what are you going to do? I mean, I hope if there's a handful of good bishops, I hope they do what they can do. And then if it should happen that a good bishop is appointed, he will have a model of how it can be done. All right. And just slowly you will get and I think the laity has to really push for good seminaries. I think the lay boards of seminaries have to demand a very thorough auditing and accounting of what goes on in the seminary. I mean, interviewing everybody who's been in that seminary that's alive for the last 50 years and ask what their experience was, blah, 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 what is it now? Just try to get the real truth of the matter. If there's any problems in the seminaries, clean them up, because that's where the next generation of priests are coming from. I think all of us, as I said, just have to pray. We have to, I think it is an odd moment for the new, God does strange things. Most Catholics are miserable evangelists. We don't even know how to introduce Jesus or the church into a conversation. But it comes into the conversation now. And Catholics when it comes into the conversation, people say, how are you feeling? You say, I'm really kind of low today. I read about another parish, another priest, another diocese, another scandal. And then they're going to ask you, why do you stay in the church? And then you tell them. And you have an opportunity to be a powerful witness. And I've actually heard in some places there's more people than ever that are coming into the church. And I suspect that some of it has to do with the fact that there are those of us who stay, and we really know what the church is. Again, it's not the local priest. It's not the bishop. It's not the pope, right? It's Jesus' bride, and that feeds us, nourishes us, and we're not going anywhere. So I think it's a bizarre, odd opportunity. Yeah, a bizarre opportunity to be really powerful new engagers in the new evangelization, that our enthusiasm for remaining in the church and our willingness to make a public witness to our staying in this church, which we believe right now is pretty darn corrupt. It's because we believe in Jesus. We can't live without the sacraments. And we want to convince others that their lives will improve greatly if they accept the invitation that the Church Triumphant, offers.
Great. So let me last thought here. One of the things that has been coming up in a lot of the interviews that I've had about people who deal with such things, with these difficult things in the church, has been the role of Our Lady in all of this. And how has Our Lady affected you in your life and in dealing with this situation specifically?
Well, I certainly love Our Lady and trying to be more and more dedicated to saying the rosary and asking for her help and her guidance in whatever needs to be done. And again, loving her priests, loving the ones that we believe are good, and trying to support them and realize that they're not under a cloud of suspicion, and we love what they're doing. Our Lady is at the heart of everything. I mean, do what he tells you. Go to Mary first and do what he tells you. I think that's the formula for things. I've always found that when I pray to Mary, she kind of answers my novenas before I'm done. If I pray to God the Father, who is all about God the Father, he practices brinkmanship. He takes me right up to the moment of complete desperation and then answers something in some spectacularly wonderful way. So it depends on what sort of thrill I'm wanting, who I go to. But I think that one thing that is, again, as we become more prayerful, we start to see how the supernatural works. Again, you see media like yours and others who have been vilified and ignored and dismissed. And they're looking for any little misstep you might take to just brush you aside and say everything you say is false. You make some misstep, and I want to say there's not any media on the face of the earth I trust more than some of the Catholic media. You know that someone's ready to put a knife in your back the minute they get. So you're being hyper vigilant. But in this kind of work, as you know, you're dealing a lot with rumors and innuendos. And Richard Sipes said that's all you're going to get. He said that this is not the kind of crime of sexual abuse that's going to have the kind of evidence that you want for other crimes. He said the most important evidence, honestly, is a person's willingness to come forward about it, because it's tremendously painful and embarrassing and self-incriminating, though there's no self-incrimination, really, that's how you feel. And the fact that people are willing to come forward about this is in itself powerful evidence of misconduct. And so you're dealing with the messiest kind of stuff that's very hard to prove. I'm not certain where he's going with all of this, but it has something to do with, what does it have to do with John Henry Mandel?
Yeah, no, just coming back to Our Lady. Just for me personally, it's been it's sort of an abandonment of, as you were saying earlier on in the show, you were saying that you're relying more on prayer than on intellect now, and more on sort of contemplation. I think the answer with regard to these toughest of questions, probably the worst crisis ever in the history of the church, we have the words of Our Lady of Fatima and of the encouragement that we got in 1917. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. I think I always come at it as a little child with my mother, and for me, that's the easiest way of dealing with all these things. As a little child, you don't get often what's going on in the situation. You don't know how to deal with it, but you can run to your mother and know that she can deal with it. And sometimes if the situation's really, really bad, she hides you in her mantle or in her skirt, and so you don't even have to look at it. You just sort of run to her. It's where I've taken a lot of solace, and it's been for me a great grace.
Oh, John, you have to be under enormous attack for the good that you're doing, and you see the darkest places, and you know how hard it is to bring that forward. And I think yes, running to our mother and cuddling in her mantle is extremely important. And I want to say that I talked to a very good Catholic friend this weekend, and she didn't know a lot. She didn't know much about this at all. She's a mother of many. She's a teacher. She didn't know much, and she said. And I said, so well, if you want to know about it, you should do X. And she said, I don't want to know about it. And I said, fine. I said, that really is fine. What you're doing is fine. And I want to say anybody who's torn up by this or is finding themselves becoming depressed or finding themselves, again, thinking of leaving the church, stop. Stop reading about this stuff. Stop informing yourself. Just let the others who have been given some special assignment by the Lord to do this and do your daily duties, do them faithfully, pray for the church, and don't let it, get you down. As you said, go to your mother and let your mother raise your hopes. I have, again, friends who have recommitted themselves to saying the rosary every day, and they are finding a peace and a joy in their system that they haven't felt possibly ever. Mary is right here ready to console us. She knows her son is in charge. She knows the Holy Spirit's doing what the Holy Spirit's supposed to do. She knows that God the Father is right in the middle of all of this, knows just what's going on, knows the conclusion of all this, and simply wants us, as always, to have our faith deepened. So I think you're right. If nothing else, just go to Mary. In fact, go there first.
Professor Dr. Janet Smith, thank you so very much for being with us here on LifeSite News' John Henry Westen Show. And might I see in you, in your fierce heart fighting for the church and for her children, the heart of Mary that also fights for her children. May God bless you.
That's very kind. Thank you.